We are expecting Commissioner Trumbull late.
All right, so let's do roll call to start at your end.
Forcell here.
Schwartz present.
Danaher present.
Johnston present.
And Councilmember Filseth is here. All right. Pull up the agenda here. There's our agenda. All right, members of the public who have a speaker card from Robert Hinden.
Oh, I think my pen is open.
Hello, I'm Robert Hinden. I live on Murray Way in Palo Alto. I have a question about what's happening with smart meters in Palo Alto. I'm aware that there was a pilot some time ago, but that's closed. I added solar panels to my house, and I'd like to get I'm getting an electric car later, hopefully this year, and I would like to get a better idea of what my actual generation and consumption is, and it seems like having smart meters, and I thought this I mean, in some ways, this seems like something Palo Alto should be doing. I don't understand what the holdup is.
All right, well, it's not an agendized item, but just as an informational item, it's in the plans. The city first has to implement some software updates for its whole ERP system. They're not doing too much at once, and then we'll start on the automated meter infrastructure in 2 years.
As a matter of fact, it is on the agenda tonight. So you have a more elaborate description, but if you would like to talk to Shiva Swaminathan, he is available. Perhaps could just answer the question directly.
Okay, 2 years seems like forever, but
We're all impatient for this. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Any comments? Thank you. Any comments on the minutes? Motion approved?
Two sets. Right?
Oh, we've got two sets. That's right. It's both September 6th and October 4th. Are there comments on either? Motion to approve?
I'll move to approve both the September 6th and October 4th minutes.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously. Great. Then the next item was the strategic planning update and, pardon me.
Item 4, your agenda
Item
review.
4, we were going to talk about, thank you for reminding me. We had talked Monday with that about moving item 3 down below item 5, just
Yes.
to deal with the more thoughtful items first. Is that okay with folks? All right, we'll do that. Let me just ask, is there anybody here to comment on item 2? All right, so I would also suggest that we move item 2 down after item 5. All right, we'll do that. Reports from commissioner meetings and events. Judith.
Hi, everyone. So on October 18th and 19th, I attended the California ISO Stakeholder Symposium and spoke on a panel on community solar. There were over 1,000 attendees, mostly senior level executives and policymakers from government agencies, CAISO, the IOUs, and munis across the state. There were also representatives from other states. The symposium was followed immediately by the California-Germany Bilateral Energy Conference, which had a smaller group of several hundred attendees. In both settings, the speakers were very enthusiastic about creating a decarbonized energy future, and there were some major takeaways that I felt were very relevant to what we're dealing with. So on multiple panels, they reinforced that regional cooperation is key to having a solution to decarbonize the energy supply. The point was made several times that that California cannot do it by itself. making Palo Alto even more of a blip in the greater scheme of things. The barrier to other Western states becoming part of CAISO is that they are nervous about being directed by the California legislature, where the emphasis on renewables at the expense of everything else is viewed in many circles as unrealistic. The California goals set by the legislature, the CPUC, and CAISO are so aggressive, it is already a stretch to meet statewide operational goals. So in my opinion, it makes no sense to have Palo Alto set aspirational targets even more extreme. And I think to do so makes us an outlier, not a model. In both conferences, it was reinforced that the big winner to make a significant shift is electrification of transportation, which is responsible for 36.2% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's the problem that I think was pointed out that we should be addressing, especially given our local concentration of EVs and hybrids with an equal number of commuter vehicles and large buses transporting workers to local companies every day. Hal Harvey, who is the CEO of Energy Innovation, a San Francisco energy and environmental policy firm, spoke at the California Germany conference. He said, "Focus on the big issues, not the decorative, less meaningful ones." And so I think that what it points out is that residential heating and cooking is such a small part of the equation that for Palo Alto to focus on requiring heat pumps or shaming people for having gas stoves is a distraction. Several speakers asserted that baseload is being phased out through market forces, yet storage is not yet mature enough to replace our dependency on natural gas for the foreseeable future if we want to have a modern industrial society. During the presentations by the German speakers, it was astounding to see how the national decision to phase out zero-carbon nuclear has led to significant dependence on coal and lignite, which is a low-cost, low-quality coal that can be gasified into synthetic natural gas. I don't know, oxymoron. So another point that came up at the event was that there is geothermal available for evening and morning resources, and I encourage the staff to follow up with LADWP and the technology company that wrote. I also sent an article and some links to Commissioner Danaher and to Arnie, and then I also sent it, so that I wouldn't violate the Brown Act, I sent it to Commissioner Forcell so that she was, so that she could know what it was, and so I'm bringing it up here so that I'm being open. But my point is that if we really want to animate markets and help renewable generation, then supporting resources like geothermal would be more valuable in the long run than relying on RECs to achieve carbon neutral status. Now, yesterday, I participated remotely in the CPUC's workshop on customer choice in Sacramento. And again, I saw this gap between aspirational goals and the practical reality of what it takes to deliver electricity. The sense that CCAs, which are community choice aggregators, for anybody not familiar with the acronym, are going to become more dominant was seen as a fait accompli by some speakers, even though others warned this could destabilize the system, resulting in rolling blackouts, as occurred the last time California tried a deregulated market 20 years ago. And so while low-income consumers may not be as big a problem for Palo Alto, a third of California consumers are enrolled in income-qualified programs at the IOUs. The core principles panel warned that a model that optimizes for affluent prosumers and companies focused on self-benefit rather than equity for society as a whole risks putting the financial responsibility for traditional assets and infrastructure on those who can't afford or don't wish to make those investments themselves. Even CPUC President Picker expressed concern that things are happening that are creating patterns that are not sensible. And to me, the real point of these three different events was that we really need to think about the big picture as we proceed and advise the City Council. So thank you. Who's ever doing the notes.
Judith, thank you very much. And record show that Commissioner Trumbull arrived. Other commissioner reports? Okay. Then Director of Utilities report.
Very good. I have a few items of community interest, just call to your attention. First is related to our Bay Area SunShares program that we are participating in. This was originally scheduled to close on November 10th, but has now been extended to November 30th. This is a program in which the staff is participating in outreach to inform the community about this limited time offer to sign contracts for discounts on solar PV installations and zero emissions vehicles. Palo Alto is currently ranked second among Bay Area cities for a total number of registrations, following closely behind Berkeley. Help us spread the word that with this offer, it's a great time to go solar. Registration on the city's website, cityofpaloalto.org/sunshares. Further on driving electric in Palo Alto, let's see, in Palo Alto particularly makes sense as an EV hub, given our carbon neutral electric utility and low electric retail rates. Our city is one of the top in the nation to embrace this technology. In fact, the International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT, recently released a report indicating that in 2016, more than 22% of all new vehicles purchased in Palo Alto were electric, which gives us the highest percentage among California communities. City does, on an ongoing basis, try to make it easy and economical to drive electric, and further information as we continue to consolidate our messaging and integrate our programs available on city's website, cityofpaloalto.org/electric vehicle. Also note on Public Power and Public Natural Gas Week. During the week of October 1st through 7th, City celebrated both Public Power and Public Natural Gas Week. These are annual campaigns recognizing the value of local not-for-profit power and gas utilities, this year marking 120 years of the City of Palo Alto delivering electricity and 100 years for delivering natural gas. With this municipally owned utility, Palo Alto residents and businesses are direct stakeholders in our energy resources. Finally, on an upcoming event, we have this Saturday, November 4th, a workshop on designing native gardens and rainwater harvesting. Details and registration available at our website, cityofpaloalto.org/workshops. And that concludes my report. Exactly. Quite impressive. Very good, thank you. I'll make this a very brief report. The staff is continuing work following our October 4th community workshop. Once again, I'd like to say thank you to the commissioners and public who attended and provided us a wide range of feedback on topics related to our utility. Staff is working busily on a variety of fronts to put together that input along with the others that we've received, and we'll be coming back to your next meeting. So your December meeting will actually have quite a substantive discussion of our action plan. So in fact, if you are looking at your screen, let's see, I believe we do show in your December meeting, December 6th, we will be coming forward with some recommendations around the revised strategic plan, and following your discussion and at the point that the UAC is comfortable with our recommendations, we'll then be bringing it forward for City Council consideration after the first of the year. And that is it. So since this has been a standing item on your agenda, I wanted to provide that. Well, once again, the more substantive discussion will be next month.
All right, thank you. So we'll proceed to item number 4 then, the smart grid assessment and developing the utility tech roadmap.
I'm sorry, just to confirm the order of items. I actually thought we were taking up 5 next. So to No, I do not, so. We would like to do 5 first? Okay, if that's okay, let's proceed with that. Thank you. So it will be 5, then followed by 4?
Yes.
Then 3 and 2, actually, so it'll go in reverse order. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Shiva, Senior Resource Planner, Utilities. You have a report in front of you detailing many elements of this plan. So I'm going to go through some high-level slides. Before I do that, I would like to recognize many members of the team who helped put this together. Lena Perkins, who is not here today, Sanika, Eric, and many others helped pull this together. So we'll talk about the current initiatives related to distributed energy resources and their projections, and then the proposed action plan. So we'll talk about the background. We will provide some forecasts, which you have in your report, and the plan elements, and then the timeline and next steps. So what is DER? I think all of us pretty much know what it is. It has the potential to impact the timing, location, and size of our electric load in the distribution system. And commonly, electric vehicles, and the list there is what we consider distributed energy resources. Why do we care about DERs? We have, as our general manager outlined, there is a lot of electric vehicles. We currently estimate about 2,500 electric vehicles in town, and about the same number, 2,500 registered in town, and about the same number driving into town every day as part of the commute vehicles, and they charge here. We currently think about 0.5% of our energy load is met by, goes to serve the electric vehicles, and they're coming. So, and then as part of the state, it's a central part of the state's objective to reduce carbon and increase resiliency. And they do affect our loads and finances, so we'll go through some of those elements as we speak. So next, we did a look at what are the current elements which we already, the commissioners have already approved. The left 4 items, which you already have approved many elements of it. The energy efficiency plan, which we, starting from the left below, local solar plan, which the council approved back in 2014, which we are currently operating under. You will hear an update on the local solar plan early next year. On the electrification work plan, that's where we talked about encouraging electric vehicles and electrification. That again will be updated and as part of our sustainability implementation plan in the coming months. And then energy storage assessment, if you recall, you all approved that assessment earlier this year, where we determined not to set storage goals because they're relatively expensive, but potentially look at pilot projects to spur customer interest and look at applications. Then our focus is on energy efficiency. We spend bulk of our time on promoting energy efficiency and conservation program. And then going forward, we are doing an integrated energy resource plan. If you recall, Monica Padilla has briefed you on different steps related to that in the past few months. And going forward, this distributed energy resource plan will feed into that plan and will become an integrated resource plan. We are currently looking at the distribution system, its ability to handle these distributed energy resources. The first review the past year there are no major constraints, but we'll have to look at load pockets and in the distribution feeder. So that work will come to you in spring of next year. And then AMI Smart Grid is a enabling technology which has to be in place to optimize these distributed energy resources. So those are the elements which feed into the DER plan.
For Mr. Hendon's benefit, do you want to tell us the AMI timeline
Unfortunately, 2022, that's 5 years, not 2.
to finish it? Or when does it start rolling out?
Well, it'll be 2022, and within a year, all the customers would get that. But currently, we have a pilot. There is some room to the extent there is some interest and there is compelling reasons we potentially could roll out. So we can.
I just want to say, if there is an option to encourage people who are very interested to be able to be another segment in the pilot study, I would strongly encourage you to do that. I think capturing public interest of people who are already committed and would be a great thing to do for the longer term rollout success. Because then you have champions who have the experience.
Okay. All right, so with that background, so we did take a look at estimating long-term projections of loads and distributed energy resource. What you have there on the screen, the dotted lines shows our potential energy growth till 2030 if we did not have distributed energy resource. And if we did have electric vehicles only, the loads would go up by about 5% by 2030. But if you net that off against energy efficiency savings and PV penetration, our total load due to DER would be about 6.6% lower than what it would have been otherwise. But if you just look at the metric of what is our load today versus in 2030, we anticipate it to be relatively flat, perhaps a small decrease of about 1%. So this is call it a long-range guesstimate based on state projections, and our penetrations are higher than the states. It can range from, it's a high uncertainty band around them, plus or minus. So there is uncertainty band around them, and we'll be planning accordingly. Most of the 5% energy load for electric vehicles will come from the residential sector. Since the residential sector is only 15% of our load, a 5% increase could potentially be about 30% increase in residential energy consumption. And the projection is about 40% of homes would have EVs by 2030, the penetration of about 40%. That's based on state numbers and a high penetration for Palo Alto. So those are the assumptions behind this. This is an illustration of what would our daily load, or hourly load look like in the summer of 2030 compared to the gray line is what it was this year. And we've kind of dispatched these distributed energy resources to try to reduce the peak load. We could dispatch them in different ways. The blue, what you see here is EVs charging at night, and so that increases the load at night time, and then lower level of charging during the day. But down the road, which we are seeing currently, is if we want to increase our load because the solar excess production, we could send price signals to increase the load during the daytime as well. So this is a scenario of what it could be given the distributed energy resource. Distributed energy resources tend to lower our sales. Electric vehicles will add to our load, so it will increase our sales, and energy efficiency and PV tends to reduce our sales because the net load is lower. This is just illustrating the impact on net revenues or margin to fixed cost in that timeline we are looking at. So in summary, we anticipate the loads to be about flat or about 1% lower in 2030. Offset electric loads, EV loads increasing the load, and then the others offsetting them. Our peak loads potentially reducing by 5 to 10%, making it a flatter load. And as I mentioned, the growth of EV in the residential sector would make the residential sector energy consumption grow faster than the rest of the commercial sector. And as I mentioned, the PV and energy efficiency will lower net revenues. On the other hand, electric vehicles and demand response could increase our net revenues. And we are looking for opportunities to try to aggregate these distributed energy resources and try to harness greater value, whether it's dispatching into the ISO or to meet distribution system needs. For example, the PV have the ability to inject capacitive power into the system when we need in the distribution system. So we are doing assessments of how we can use PV in other ways other than energy only.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
How does commercial demand response increase net revenues?
Because we have a high capacity fee we pay, which hits it. So they reduce it, we pay them as an incentive, but to the extent the savings is higher than what we pay our commercial customers, it's an addition to the net revenue.
And given the concern that the community has on the carbon content of our energy, have you done this mapping for what the impact is from a carbon standpoint? Because I think that in terms of when you're determining time of use pricing, for example, you know, that we need to be looking at this differently if what we're trying to do is get the usage of our solar resources to be used to the optimum capability and not having to buy, you know, gas on the gas generated electricity on the spot market. You know, I think it needs to be done in that context as well. So is that an analysis that you've done?
We have not done that, but in our plan, one of the action items is to kind of do that type of analysis too. And what we can do about it is another part of implementation of programs to respond to that. How soon we'll be able to come up with those programs? Probably not very soon, but we will experiment with some of those in terms of dispatching into the ISO. So given that background, we thought for communication and coordination purposes within utilities, the engineering operations and resource management, as well as with the sustainability staff within the city, and to communicate with the stakeholders, we came up with this DER plan with the goal of enhancing the value of DERs for the community. So each community member decides to put their own distributed energy resource for their own value proposition, and to the extent we can facilitate that and enhance that value, what could we do about that? That's kind of the objective of it. And outlined there are 5 objectives broadly, which you have in your packet. And then we came up with 9 strategies. The first 4 are kind of focused on the customer to lower the barriers for adoption, increase resiliency, and resiliency is kind of 2 parts. One is lower reliance on the transmission grid to the extent we have our own resources, and then to the extent we can dispatch them to signals from the transmission grid, we can support the transmission grid's resiliency. That's kind of external looking. And then internal looking within the city, to the extent we have storage at a customer premise level, there is potential for high resiliency. 5, 10, 20 years down the road, to the extent we have a lot of PV and the storage cost comes down, we can potentially look at a feeder level, higher level of resiliency, which we can build. But that's down the road, not anytime soon.
And I just want to say that this is exactly the point, though, that I was trying to make earlier when I was talking about that meeting, is that the idea of self-weighing self-benefit versus benefit to the community. So if somebody is setting up their operation so they're completely independent and they're off the grid, that's one thing. But if somebody's setting it up so that they still have a giant house that is going to need a lot of electricity when they have a party, and the utility has to have everything available and the infrastructure in place and the capacity in place so that they can turn on every light in their house, you know, that's part of, in terms of pricing and things like that, that has to be accommodated. And this idea of how demand charges, or how they're generally referred to in, you know, with commercial customers, but I think that's something we have to look at. So when you're lowering barriers, I think it's also important to manage expectations that just because somebody puts in a giant solar system that benefits them doesn't mean they don't still have a responsibility to the community at large to help pay for assets.
Yep, good, thank you. And then number 5 is the second topic for discussion today, advanced meters and essential part of integrating this. We're already doing assessment on distribution system, and the others are self-explanatory. So those are the broad outlines. And we are already devoting close to 7-8 staff members on distributed energy resources, mainly related to energy efficiency. Electric vehicles are the 2 major areas, and a little bit on electrification and then demand response. So those are the areas we're already devoting, and we think these different areas, there needs to be a little bit more coordination and projects to the extent that the community wants us to engage in this effort. And this is just an estimate of what the potential additional staffing effort and the costs could be. The chart on the top just says we are kind of focusing on phase 1 here till 2022, when our AMI systems would be in place. And then the phase 2 would be kind of integration and dispatching into the CalISO. So this is like a phase 1 plan. So in summary, this is we feel this is a good opportunity to engage with the community and seek their input of what type of programs do they want. We'd like your input today. And then we plan to come back with a plan for in the spring for UAC and Council for approval. And this also will become part of our integrated resource plan that we have to submit to the state by the end of next year. So for today, and these are some of the forum we were contemplating as we to engage the community to get their feedback on the different elements of the plan, what they would like us to do. And so some of the elements are already included in attachment A, so we would like your input on that, and also on what the commissioners think is the level of engagement we need to do on this. Thank you.
I've got a couple.
Go back to the, go back a slide or two, one where you had the list of, okay, no, keep going, no, you went back too far. I just wanted back 1 or 2 where you had the list of what you were going to do in terms of the community.
Community engagement, so it's second to the last.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that I felt after our community outreach the other day on October 4th was that it could have been done in a way that would have allowed us to reach more elements in the community. And there are techniques that work that are well proven, and I think we have to up our game in how we do that. That I think it's really important to get people to participate and to understand what's going on and understand what they're commenting on, so that we're not just hearing from the people for whom this is a religious issue. And I think that we have a broad, our community is changing in a lot of ways, and it means that we have to reach out to groups that are non-standard in terms of energy and environmental causes, and I was disappointed that we didn't, even though we asked to see the plan of what we were going to do, that we didn't get the opportunity to do that. There was nothing we could send, like I have our neighborhood, our street, we do block parties and everything, and I would have loved to have sent a description of what we were going to do to try and get other people to come, and there was nothing to send them. And I think that we have to do, if we really are serious about engaging the community, you can't just post something on social media or next door and think that that's sufficient. And so I think that, because I think that if you're just hearing from the people who are passionate about this, you're going to have a really nasty surprise later on when all the people who are not passionate about it find out that this is affecting their bills and their lives and that kind of thing. And so it's something that's easily anticipated, and it's something that's easily managed.
If I might comment, I think what you're referring to, based on our exchanges, both perhaps right before and at the forum, you're referring to the actual agenda and perhaps being more specific on what was presented, because we did provide multiple notifications of the workshop that was upcoming. We did not have a drill down on the specifics of what was the content of the workshop, but I do want to be clear that we did quite a bit of outreach on the workshop itself.
The information that was shared, in my opinion, was inadequate. And you have to tell people more that we're going to get you in a room and talk to you. It's more involved in that. And when you do this well and you cultivate people who are champions for different and for different groups, then they talk it up for their communities and their constituencies. And we did not follow those kind of practices for this. And so I don't think we have to be defensive about it. It's done. There's nothing we do. But moving forward, I think we can do a better job.
For what it's worth, I do think we have a difference of perhaps opinion or perspective on the intent of the outreach. You know, we're really not trying to market, per se, the programs at this point. This is organizationally looking at effectively what the community wants to share with us.
I understand, but if you're not hearing from a broad range of constituents, you're not going to be reflecting what the community cares about, in terms of that not everybody cares about things the same way. And if you have a handful of people that are the only ones you hear from, you don't. And so there are techniques that exist that you can find out a broader group.
You know, if I may, the notice was very high level, maybe a one-line description of the content of the meeting.
Right.
But maybe is there one or two people on your staff that Judith could talk to offline about these techniques, because she has a lot of experience in that?
Certainly. Catherine would be the lead for us, Catherine Elbert. And as we go forward, in particular, you know, as with this screen up, the DER plan really does provide a much more tangible and specific opportunity for people to weigh in. So in particular, whether, let's say, surveying, if that were a tool that we're using to identify both the magnitude and the pace of interest that consumers are interested in pursuing, everything from EV, photovoltaics, efficiency and the like, and some of the priorities. This actually does present a much more tangible opportunity for us to potentially get a more random and representative indication of consumer interest within our service area. So we are looking forward to this particular next phase as a way for us to have a much more, we'll call it statistically significant opportunity for feedback.
So Judith, would you be willing to spend some time with Catherine offline? I appreciate that.
I had a couple of questions from the report, and some of these are basic questions, but one of the things you show in your report is that the majority of staff time currently is being spent on energy efficiency, and I'd just like to get an idea, what are the staff doing to promote energy efficiency? What are those 4 FTEs doing?
So broadly, we have customer programs designed to different segments of residential, 15% of the load, but we perhaps spend 30% of our time in the residential and then commercial. We have different programs, whether it's rebates or outreach or informational programs. So, for example, we talked about solar, the SunShares program to promote certain programs on the residential side. On the commercial side, we manage contractors, which is the bulk of the work, to go into buildings, or we have our key account representatives who are in touch with different businesses as they have upgrades needs, whether it's HVAC or lighting or process improvement. Our contractors, who are like a turnkey, they go in, give an assessment, what is the potential energy savings, and it's a one-stop shop. If the building owner wants to do the job, they'll get it done.
And the contractors are included in these 4 FTEs?
Not in the FTEs,
Right.
But in the $3 to $4 million cost.
Okay.
So the 4 FTEs are kind of staffing to support the contractors as well as direct programs. We have another program where the Home Genie, where contractors come to homes and provide advice and input. And so there are multiple programs. Some of them are actually listed in the informational report, which you currently have on the different how the segments are worked out. So.
Okay.
And I'll also note, if you're interested in, as much detail as you can possibly consume on our energy efficiency programs, you want to take a look at our annual energy efficiency, demand side management report. And I can forward you the link to that informational report to anybody who's interested.
Right.
Absolutely.
So another question, unrelated. Commissioner Swartz was talking about trying to match EV charging, for example, to when we actually have solar resources, solar power generating power. Have you looked at whether the transmission system, because that's during our peak demand time, if everybody charged their EVs during that peak demand time, do we have any transmission constraints at that point?
There's transmission and there's distribution.
Okay.
So on the transmission, there are constraints at times in a very peak day. There's limited transmission coming into the Bay Area. But it has been relieved mostly currently. So on the transmission side, currently there's no major constraints. On the distribution side, yes. In a the residential load doesn't peak till 6 to 7 in the evening, in the winter, and perhaps even later in the summer. And we do not want the EVs to charge during the residential peak time, which is not when the sun is up. So there are different iterations depending on which load it is. But on the commercial side, I think there is a case to be made that on the commercial feeders, we have sufficient feeding capacity, sufficient transformer capacity that we could incentivize if there are EV chargers directly connected to our meters, that encouraging daytime charging, but not necessarily through the building load, but on its own. So there are distribution.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that last part about the building load.
So we can provide incentives for, so currently the EV chargers are supplied through the building load.
Right.
So we have a meter for the building, it's supplied.
Right.
And so if we have EV only rate to get people to charge during that time, that has to be metered separately.
I see.
There are many angles to consider other than just the energy only, but that's an optimization we'll have to do as we go along.
And one other mostly unrelated question. I know that the technology for basically vehicle to grid, allowing the batteries in EVs to be used to supplement power is still a ways off. But are you considering any of that in this plan?
No, we are not. So that's a ways. It's more of controlling the charging to the car, controlling the time and when to charge the car.
And not looking to get anything back from
not at this.
that potential resource?
Not at this time. Not in the next 5 years.
Thank you.
I had a question just generally on the plan, whether you can put in any kind of measurements so that you have your goals, your objectives, you have the strategies, but then some kind of measurement so you know that you've achieved your goals or haven't, or to help actually quantify the success.
Okay?
And then I had another question. So you had commented that all of this requires AMIs, and I'm wondering if there's anything we can do in, in the next 5 years, whether it's encouraging EV charging at a certain time or some kind of community, not really outreach, but education.
Yes, most certainly. And there are several aspects to that. Again, it depends on how much effort we want to put in. So for example, we talk to smart thermostat vendors. They have visibility into their smart thermostats, and they could potentially control that without the AMI and estimate the energy saved or by shifting heating loads and the motor loads. And ISO is contemplating recognizing those as pilots without being verified with smart meters. So Nest is one. Another one is EV charging. There's a port in the vehicle itself which we can plug into and send controls to disconnect the charging, and there is real-time data. So we have to, for those programs, we have to work through the vendors who already have access to their customers. So we have to work through the Teslas, the Nests of the world to do that type of work. We have had preliminary discussions the past couple of years, but it requires a lot of customer touch points, and depending on customer engagement, what we find out, we can focus on a couple of those and get them done.
Because what you can't do is give people price incentives that are timed to the interval when they're using the, we can't use price signals as an incentive for people without having the AMI infrastructure.
No, I understand that. I'm not even talking about pricing incentive or even any fine level information, just the idea that if we have this huge solar capacity during the day and people have electric vehicles, they may be able to charge during the day and just don't know that that might be a better time. Just general
informational, yeah, that's, we try to do that, but we can definitely do a better job of it.
Then it's voluntary, and which again, in a place like Palo Alto, you can probably get a better uptake than a lot of places, but what's been found is that you only get a certain portion of the population will do it for altruistic reasons. Some people want to get paid to do it, and so, I think that's so I think that's what we're the masters of, are the things that people will do for altruistic reasons.
Not to belabor it, but without knowledge, they can't even do it for altruistic reasons.
I had a couple of fairly minor comments, but there are a couple places in the strategies where in strategy number 1 and strategy number 3, probably other places. Of attachment A. Where the potential for carbon reduction is going to be one of the methods used for evaluating, a strategy. And I guess I just wanted to put the idea out there. You oftentimes in UAC meetings, when the cost of carbon comes up, I'll raise my hand and ask, what are you using as the cost of carbon, and is it the market price? And I'm just curious if there's any legislative reason we couldn't consider using a social cost of carbon, like a lot of numbers come out of academia that are higher than what's on the California cap and trade market. If that's even something that we could consider doing, and then we would have to debate what we, as a city felt was the appropriate social cost of carbon.
So this is one of those topics that's both a utility topic and a citywide topic, and it is something being discussed in the context of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. whether or not it's going to be specifically called out in the implementation plan, I don't know, but it is something that we're discussing internally, because we recognize the potential implications of adopting a cost of carbon like that.
Yeah, I mean, just to further belabor the point, if carbon in California is trading at like $12, but the social cost of carbon is felt to be somewhere between $40 and $80, that sure tips the scales on what strategies you might feel are cost effective versus not. And then just one other thing that I wanted to mention, in lowering barriers to adoption, again, this is on attachment A, strategy 1, subpart B, subpart 3, evaluating and potentially implementing on-bill financing programs. I know we had I think it was just a discussion item a while back in a UAC meeting, and yeah, it was just a discussion item, so we didn't have to take any action, but certainly based on that presentation and based on reading that I've done on bill financing program and PACE programs, I'm not at all convinced that it's a good idea to incentivize or provide PACE financing, especially given sort of as the market for that has matured. It seems to be susceptible to a lot of predatory lending practices and sort of exactly doing the opposite of what it should be doing. And so I just wanted to call that out, that it's, to me, not a given that that is something that the utility should pursue.
So just to comment on that, you're absolutely right in terms of the PACE type program. This is more of on bill, where the borrowing happens directly through us. For example, like a meter charge. So for example, if someone wants to put an EV charger in their home, they have to upgrade the panel, the cost is $10,000. And to the extent we can put a meter charge, say $100 to be paid over 100 months, a kind of a meter charge which will pass on our low cost of capital, and it won't have a lien on the property. It'll pass from resident to, so there are some modified approaches to PACE, which is PACE is a third-party lender coming in. This is a slightly modified approach. It's been talked about, so that's what we're hoping to focus on.
And there are lots of good examples of legitimate and reasonable on-bill financing that have been really instrumental and a positive thing. And if the utility does it, they tend not to be the predatory lenders. So it's a good vehicle when it's properly administered.
All right, Councilmember Filseth had comments, questions?
I actually wanted to make three things here. First of all, on the issue of when you charge the EV, right? So this is going to be a focus group of one, okay? But having owned and driven an EV for 9 years now, for a lot of that time, you know, I worked in the South Bay and was commuting down there every day, okay? And if you work out of town, right, and have an EV, you're going to charge it at night, okay? Because you drive it to your job, you work all day, you come back and you plug it in, right? So, so my guess is that those folks are not going to respond to price incentives or anything as to what time of day they charge it, just because, you know, they charge it when they're home and that's at night. On the other hand, people that, you know, live in Palo Alto and also work in Palo Alto, and now that I don't commute every day to the South Bay anymore, I charge it up once a week or something like that, right? And so I might be very susceptible to, can you charge it in the daytime and so forth. So I'm just going to throw out the idea that as you sort of forecast for this, you might want to take a look at sort of proportion of people that live in Palo Alto and work in Palo Alto versus commute out elsewhere. And there is data on this. And Greg Schmidt had a number. I don't know exactly where it came from, but he estimated that, you know, slightly over half of Palo Alto employed residents commute somewhere else and don't work in news. It was something like that. Anyway, so as you forecast, you might take a look at that. Second thing I wanted to ask was, you're forecasting a pretty big expansion in solar photovoltaics in town. It looked like between doubling and tripling in the next 13 years. which works out to a sustained 7 or 8% a year increase. So I guess my question is, is that a reasonably solid number? Are we seeing that kind of growth now? And to Judith's point earlier, right, are we going to run through all the early adopters and then there's not going to be anybody left, right? So is that I guess my question is that a realistic estimate?
We think so. The prices tend to decline, and our rates tend to go up, and so at some point, last 15 years, it was not economical to put PV in Palo Alto.
Right.
It still is not, but as the price decline and our retail rates tends to go up, the economics is relatively more favorable. So that's one driver. And so currently we are at about 1.5%. So yes, you're right, it's triple in 12 years. That's what we are kind of projecting.
Okay.
It's a best estimate. We may be off by plus or minus 40%.
Okay. I was just going to observe that, I think the city of Palo Alto, you folks, have done a spectacularly good job at making making it easy for casual electricity users to go green, okay? All you got to do is plug in your lamp, right? It comes green from the city, right? And so you don't get very much greener by mounting solar photovoltaics. And then so with that, I would expect that for a lot of people, it's the economics, right? And utility grade solar economics versus local solar economics is, sort of a dynamic kind of thing. Okay, and then so the other thing that I wanted to ask was the expense of this program. The overwhelming majority of it is in the AMI rollout, right, which is $15 to $20 million over the 4 years, 2018 to 2022, I saw. And that's total over 4 years, not per year, right? Okay. And again, this goes back to Commissioner Schwartz's point, is that, I think people will ask, how do we make it back? What do we get for our $20 million? So as part of the communications, I hope that can be really, really clear and concise, and a real simple explanation is, here's what you get for your $20 million, right? Thank you.
Actually, that's the next topic of discussion. We'll kick off that discussion today.
Okay.
So if I could just add, so going back to your second point, I think the thing is, it goes back to Commissioner Schwartz about the communication aspect. So as we go through, as Shiva described, we're thinking maybe it's a 40%, but we're not really sure and how that's going to go. But I think it's the engagement as we move forward and how we get back to the customers, and then we actually sit down and talk to the residents and ask these certain type of questions. I think we'll have a little bit better idea on how that would go then at that point, so we can get a truer number then.
Well, there's sort of two very, very closely related issues. One is sort of, how do you reach those folks? Right. And two is, what do you tell them? Right? What's the message, right?
Right. Well, I think that, I think going back to the point is that we need to explain and talk about when is the time. Education goes a long ways, I think. And as you said, a person that actually lives here probably is going to take advantage of the nighttime portion of it. But other folks that are commuting at this period of time, they're getting home right now, this is really the time that they're going to have to charge that at that point. So that's something that we'll have to take a look at. Thanks.
So I have a few comments and questions. One is, there is a reference in section 4 on evaluating cost effectiveness and prioritizing, but I'd rather see a stronger theme as the topic we've talked about. And Ed, I'd like it if your group could come back to the UAC at some point in the next couple meetings with, here's a rank order of the types of programs and the cost effectiveness on carbon reduction and other measures. And I think, for example, photovoltaics, or promoting local photovoltaics, falls low on that because it doesn't improve our carbon, but it does cost money, whereas energy efficiency measures would fall high. EV chargers would fit in there somewhere, to the extent you're able to displace gas and change it to our electricity. But we should have that, and it should be part of our demand DER program to evaluate that constantly. Jonathan?
I can let you know that we have done those analyses and updated them regularly, and we're working on a good way to present them to the UAC in a form that's similar to other analyses that have been done of that topic. So.
Okay, terrific. I'm pleased to hear that. You know, we do have some point, perhaps, a UAC council joint session. We had to postpone that. The council has other priorities, which I understand. But that might be something to see in advance of that. It may be informative for that discussion. I thought of that also in connection with the projected increase in photovoltaics as part of our DER resources. You know, how much of that is customer choice is fine, but how much is subsidy driven is a different matter. That's still open to question how much we want to subsidize that. Secondly, I'd like to see more of an emphasis, or maybe as one of the goals of this is in a more headline way, future-proofing what we do, anticipating technologies on that. Now, you mentioned that we're not going to see vehicle-to-grid in the next 5 years. So this is a 10-year program, and when we're going to be putting in a lot of chargers in the next few years, we should determine if there are things now on specs that we can require that would enable that to be vehicle-to-grid enabled later, because replacing the chargers would be expensive later on. Likewise, while I mentioned chargers, it relates to building codes, which I was going to mention as well. We should think about building codes. What can future-proof these houses for? Do they have to come pre-enabled for EV charging, or for the panels that would support that, so there's not much expense? Or are there other things we can be doing in the building codes that enable more of these distributed energy resources over time? And taking 10 years as our horizon, or through 2030, what do we want to do now? Because people make expenditures in the next 5 years that will have long-term impact. On chargers, I think the speed of charging greatly affects utility to the consumers and how much they use it. And so we ought to be looking at that as well in terms of what we subsidize or incent or whatever for businesses and others putting chargers out there for people who are visiting. So if part of our objective is to electrify more of that, trickle charging doesn't do it for people. They're not going to bother plugging in when they get to work on that. There's a reference in here about enabling customers to capture value, additional value by serving CAISO market needs, which is great, but I think we should also think about it, and you probably are, as the utility capturing the additional value by serving CAISO market needs. If we're in the position of the ones aggregating things or being in the middle, utility ought to be monetizing a lot of that, even if we share some of it with the individual business or consumer on that. Those were my primary comments on that. And I would emphasize the EV part being a bigger part of this. If it's going to be 19,000 EVs in Palo Alto 18.5, according to your projections, by 2030, that maybe deserves its own section on electrification and all that, so that it gets proper attention on this. Please.
I'm sure this is an order of magnitude off, but if you have 20,000 EVs and they charge at 10 kilowatts an hour, and half of them are going at any given time in the middle of the night, then that's like 100 megawatts, right? That's a pretty sizable load. So.
We are projecting 40 megawatts.
As you know, we on the UAC love to talk about electric vehicles, so I'm going to chime in one more time. Well, just bringing together the theme that Commissioner Schwartz opened, her remarks about thinking of ourselves in the context of the broader community, as well as Councilman Filseth's focus group of one, observing that if you work someplace else, you can't charge during the day, but certainly there's an opportunity on the commercial side for all the businesses who have employees coming in from other communities. I hope it's part of the DER strategy to encourage workplace charging and to incentivize employers to install chargers in the workplace, because that can have a huge impact. Of the 20,000 vehicles, I was looking for the place. Anyway, there's a lot of them that are going to be coming into the city, and that is a grand opportunity to encourage daytime electric vehicle charging.
So just, I agree. We have some funds through the low carbon fuel standard to encourage, to incentivize EV charging. In the workplace, we think there's enough demand and supply by the building owners or the employer to provide that service. So we are facilitating that, but our focus currently is on multifamily and mixed-use locations to kind of incentivize that sector in the next couple of years. And then as we fill up that we think that's the most underserved market. And but we are facilitating and providing information for installers for whenever our key account, our building owners ask for them. But it's a facilitation process. We're not providing any rebates at this time.
And I think to sort of get to to Councilman Philsett's point, it's not that people who are commuting from Palo Alto can't charge their EVs at night. You may want to design the program so you don't have incentive to do it right when that peak is going up, when the neck of the duck is going up. That window, you know, but if they do it from 10 at night to, you know, the morning, then it's okay. And so I think that that's why you have to look at these things holistically, because you've got a mix of incentives and a mix of things, and not everybody's going to respond to the same issues. And so if you have that portfolio of options, then it's easy to have everyone engaged to the level and in the method that works for them.
And our time of use rate exactly does that, to incentivize not to plug in your car as soon as you get home, but put it on a timer so it starts charging after 10 o'clock when the distribution transformers are least loaded.
Without a timer, the only time that, you know, you charge it up at midnight is you're getting ready to go to bed and you go, damn, I forgot to plug the car in, right? And you walk out there, you walk downstairs, or if you're in a multi-unit, right, you walk out there and you plug it in, unless you forget, in which case, you know, you're in trouble. Right? So without a timer, you know, you're gonna have to push hard.
Yeah. Technology is coming to market now, enable two-way communications, so the utility will be able to control, trickle charge, slow down things, stagger it. That'll, not too distant future.
But I think that this is one of the places where, if we want to be a model for other communities, that we have an opportunity. So for example, we don't have to just even be limited with, you know, what people do at single family homes. So let's say we're looking at multifamily dwellings, and maybe one of the other things we want to do is, for lower income people in the community, we want to make EVs that can be shared part of the equation so that people can get to jobs more easily. And so there are other things we can do by being creative that allow us to really model for other communities how to do it. And I think that those are the kinds of opportunities we have to both meet the needs of our citizens and come up with ideas that can really be breaking new ground for what other communities do, because we're going to have a concentration of EVs more than almost any other city. There are a few other cities that are like us, but we're really ahead of the game. And so I think that's where our opportunities are, or also tying it to, you know, other resource streams that we manage. So I just think that the holistic approach is the way that we have the opportunity to really shine.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to item 4. Smart grid assessment.
Yes, we just have a presentation, and Shiva will be making this one as well.
So if you recall, we came to the commission in September to provide an update of our pilot programs, and we at that time talked about a consultant coming and helping us do a assessment. So this is a work which usually works. Our consultants who are here helped us put together, and I'm just presenting that, and if you have any tough questions, we have our consultants to answer. So this is, so briefly we'll talk about the major technology projects we are currently undertaking, and then how do we implement it in a coordinated fashion. And then we will present the investment analysis for AMI systems, and then talk about next steps. So currently we are in the process of implementing a customer engagement portal for our existing billing system, which will have a utility customer app where they can pay their bills and view. Currently, you can view your bills and stuff on your smartphone, but it's not optimized for the mobile devices. So we have contracted with a company called Smart Energy and Water to come up with a customer portal to engage our customers. And this portal also has the ability to display AMI data down the road when we implement it. So it's state of the art. Well, so that we are beginning to implement that. That should be a 6 to 9 month rollout, and we'll have introduced that to the customers in the summer of next year. The customer information system, which is our billing system and our customer information system, is currently it's with the SAP. We have just issued RFP and received 6 proposals to upgrade our CIS system. That will be implemented by 2020. And along with that, our enterprise resource planning system, which is essentially a finance module and HR module, would be implemented thereafter. So,
do you want to explain what the acronyms mean?
Okay, the next.
CIS.
Okay, CIS is Customer Information System, and ERP is Enterprise Resource Planning. And after the CIS is implemented is when AMI system would be implemented. So this is kind of a broad 4 major technology projects which are currently underway, which is going to take a lot of staff and contracting time. This is kind of the same thing laid out in a graphical fashion. I won't get into that, but that's for you for future use. So here is the schematic of all these systems in a block diagram form. So we have going from the, from the bottom left, the ERP system, the finance module connects to our CIS, Customer Information System. Actually, let me go from the meters. So here are the meters, electric, gas, and water meters. The current thought is through AMI, we will replace the electric meter, but we will keep the water and gas meter and attach radios to them, and which can then pass on, communicate the usage through a network to the AMI head end, which is the top block here, which is a piece of software sitting in the cloud, which will will collect all the data, and through an integration layer, we'll get into a meter data management system, which keeps all the meter data, make sure that it's accurate, it's verified, and it's current. And then whatever billing system we have, it'll pass on the data relevant to that. So if we have a time of use, variable time of use, and we just have to program it, and it'll just pass on that relevant time slot of data to the customer information system. The My Utility account, the customer portal, will get some of this information directly from the MDMS. So this is kind of the overall block diagram of all these different pieces of software, how they work. So what's the driver? All of us know what's a driver for AMI. So this is just a list, which all of us are well aware of. So here is an assessment at a high level, looking at an investment of into the advanced metering infrastructure-based smart grid. The line number 1, capital expenditure, we estimate it to be 16.5. That's the $15 to $20 million we saw in the previous presentation. This includes costs for all the meters, setting up the network, electric meter, and then the radios for the water and gas, and the network integration costs, the meter data management system, and implementation costs. That 16.5 million is about half of it is for electric, a fourth for gas and water. So the electric portion of it is about half of that. The annual operating expense, so what do we get in return? As Councilman Filseth asked, we get a operational benefit of $3.3 million and an incremental cost of 2.3, so a net saving, ongoing operational saving of about $1 million. We'll get into a little bit of what those savings are and what those costs are. On an NPV basis, these systems typically last about 20 years. We've assessed this NPV for 18 years to be conservative, and that's what you see the NPV value discounted at 3.5%. And if you add, so on an NPV basis, so there is operational cost savings, but it doesn't pay for the 16.5 million. So what you see is an NPV of $7.3 million. Now this is kind of, we are calling it the base case, is a preliminary assessment. And, but there are sensitivities which we can run, which certain cases shows a positive NPV, certain cases negative NPV. But this is a conservative number. There are many other, well, I'll get into what are the benefits we have not included or which are difficult to quantify. This is the same chart, just displayed graphically. The total costs includes capital cost of 16.5 million, which we just saw. It's 8 million for electric, about 4 million each for gas and water, thereabouts. And then we need additional staff to manage the system. So that's kind of the estimate of the additional cost, which you see here. And then the hardware cost of maintaining the system and software costs. On the benefit side, the role of meter readers would go away, most of them. Some of them would be transitioned into this role. So we are kind of separating out different roles into different buckets. So this role will go away. Many of them would be could be into this part or other roles within the utility. So we're planning in advance. There is potentially reduce customer calls, check reads, and from our customer service and field staff, potentially a cost saving. And then the large part, the second largest part, is conservation savings. Where, through our energy efficiency and conservation program, we think we can engage the customer better. For example, our O-Power kind of program with these types of tools would be very powerful. That's our estimate. And then optimizing our distribution system through conservation voltage reduction, that's a saving there. So in net 44 million over 18 years versus a 51 million cost over the same 18-year period. And the thought is after that 18-year period, it has to be refreshed. It may have a longer life, but we've just taken 18 years into the picture as a realistic one.
When you look at the ongoing cost savings, you anticipate inflation for labor rates and the like?
Correct. So 3% inflation of costs and 1% escalation of value.
Okay.
Or operating cost savings or additions at 3%.
Okay. When you look at the cost versus benefits, are you also relying on data from other places that have put in the smart meters?
Yes, and that's our consultants' expertise. They have helped many utilities in California do these projects.
I just want to say since one of our big issues for resilience is the fact that we have so many people retiring from the utility, is the fact that you're taking a long-term approach mean that you can retrain the meter readers to do other roles that then would mitigate some of the problems we have of losing people?
Yep.
So, okay, good.
So these were the quantifiable, easily quantifiable benefits we've done, but there are a whole bunch of other difficult to quantify benefits, from improved customer experience, improved reliability, and so on. There are quite a few which we did not quantify, and these are significant. So this is just to point out. And for example, the water district is looking at, hey, we'll incentivize AMI to the extent it saves water conservation. So there are potential grant opportunities from the water district, and several other factors which we haven't considered for that assessment for now.
And I was going to say, to the extent this enables more demand response and DER generally, it could help reduce capital expenditures for electric generation and transmission, right? We might be able to lower our peak load requirements?
Correct.
And that savings isn't mentioned here? Or is it in the other slide?
I don't think we quantified the demand reduction directly, because we say the DER is doing that. So this, we can optimize it. The optimization benefit is not captured here.
But a lot of DER is going to depend on this to get the most value.
To most value out of it, that's correct. So we haven't quantified that. That's harder to quantify. The flexibility, how it provides a flexibility to move around, we haven't quantified that.
So one of the things that I don't see yet, and maybe it's coming later, but the idea of outage detection and leak detection are just huge benefits, and I don't know how you quantify that, but the idea of people knowing, that the utility has visibility when your house is out and knows whether you're
Yes.
back on again and can give you a better estimate of when that's going to be, has proven in other communities to
Yeah.
be just an enormous benefit that in the early days, no one anticipated how valuable that was going to be to people. And it's just enormous. And I don't know how you put a number on it, but it really is an important thing for people in the community to sort of get that information.
Right. That's our thought, and that's bullet item number 2, the improved reliability. Given our relatively reliable system currently, so it helps us identify the problem quicker, and that is a value. But we haven't, there are ways to quantify it, but it's not, we didn't get into that because that requires a lot of estimation. So these are the values we were able to readily come up with, and we can add a few. So it's not easy, but it's, but we didn't want to make too many assumptions into that. That's absolutely right. Improved reliability and better asset utilization. For example, looking at our transformers, if we have a better visibility of how our distribution transformers are faring, we don't have to be conservative, replacing them ahead of time. So there are lots of other value streams which very much depend on future scenarios. We didn't want to get into too much detail on that. This is a first cut at a conservative estimate. So, so what's our findings to date? So this is an interim check-in with the Commission. The analysis suggests there are significant investments. The CapEx estimate, given that this technology is mature and our consultants have done many of these projects, are relatively stable. But on the operational benefits and the costs, there are estimates, and that could vary widely. And certain scenarios, these could show a very good return on investment. But this is our base case. But again, as we talked about, the difficult to quantify values can be relatively large. And our consultant and we feel that if we do this as an engaged community, we'll be able to better utilize than other communities. Given our engaged community, EVs and PVs, our penetration, we can do much more with it. A lot of things we don't know. It's coming, future-proofing, as Commissioner was talking about, and given our ambitious sustainability goals. So based on all this, it is an enabling technology. It's a strategic investment. So staff does recommend, even with these numbers, to still go ahead and make the investment in the next 5 years, and to be part of our strategic plan going forward. So the question to the commission is, do you agree with that recommendation? It's a discussion item, but just want to get your input up. And then we'll come back in a couple of months with a report with our consultants and with a recommendation in February timeline.
Right, comments or questions? Commissioner? Councilmember?
Just really briefly, the finance in the city are going through an exercise of trying to more accurately calculate pension costs. And it's not finished yet, but my guess is that once that's done, there'll be maybe a couple million dollars more savings on the meter reading thing than you folks have here. And it's an accounting thing. Thanks.
Commissioners, comments?
Say something. No, but you could go first.
No, you please.
So I just want to say I am very enthusiastic about this. I think it's a long time coming, and all the ambitions and things that we want to do as a city, this is kind of a fundamental baseline technology, just like we can't do everything on the internet without routers. And so I think that there's a lot of evidence from other communities and other jurisdictions that you do realize value from this on a lot of levels, and I think that we have every reason to believe that it will work really positively in our community, and so I encourage my colleagues to be supportive of this.
And by the time it's implemented, there'll be many more programs that are apparent now that others will have been using. So is there a motion to agree with support the recommendation that utilities should proceed with the AMI strategic investment?
I'll move that we adopt this.
This is a discussion item, so
Okay.
we don't necessarily need a motion, but a consensus
All right, well, let me ask.
nod would be.
Let me ask individual commissioners how you feel about proceeding with this planning.
We're able to take a motion if need be.
All right, okay, all right, we'll do it as a motion. So the motion would be that the commission recommends that the utility proceed with planning the implementation of AMI.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all in favor?
No, I'm a no.
Oh, you're a no, okay. Do you want to discuss it at all or comment more?
Well, there's a couple of factors. I'm not prepared to write off $7 million of city money, which is what I read this as saying. And I had a alleged smart meter experiment put on in my house last year in a more useless piece of equipment. About 8 or 9 different meters. It was completely useless. Poorly constructed, everything about it was done poorly. This is through Palo Alto Medical Clinic. So I hope to God that technology's better, but I'm not about to say I want to support it now.
Okay. This is to proceed with the planning, not to implement.
I understand, and I might have thought differently if I was a swing vote about where I'm going, but I want to make it clear that I think there are some things that need to be done.
All right. I appreciate the comment. And you vote on that. Sheena, somebody might want to follow up, find out what.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
We're done with that agenda item. Now it's agenda item
3.
2 or 3, whatever order you prefer.
believe it
What's
is-
easier for your staff?
I believe
Ed?
it is 3. That would be our legislative guidelines. So Heather
Okay.
Dollar here to speak to that with the commission.
All right.
Good evening. Today we're here to speak a little bit about some pieces of legislation we were active on this year, speak a little bit about what we think might be coming down the pike next year, and then also we have a motion with regard to our 2018 priorities. So this agenda hopefully will be a bit brief. We have just 3 items for you, a few slides of substance, and please feel free to ask questions or engage in a discussion at any point. No need to wait till the end. Okay. So with regard to a review of 2017, and this slide and the brief presentation will supplement what is attachment B in your larger presentation, the larger context that you have. So as you know, we had a cap and trade bill earlier this year. We were pleased that the bill passed. It extended the current program, which ends in 2020 to 2030, and it continues to preserve the direct allocation. So we were really pleased about that one. With regard to the IRP modification you see here, we did see a bill that would ask us to ensure we're addressing how we're meeting our peak demand through our integrated resource plans. If you recall, we currently do a LEAP. The integrated resource plan is a state mandate, which is much like our LEAP. The first plan, the first long-term document is due in 2019. But the fact that it isn't even due until 2019 does not stop the legislature from continuing to pass laws that would affect this, and this is one of the laws that they have passed. With regard to the RPS, you may have heard of SB 100, which was a bill that had 2 components. It had an aspirational goal to achieve statewide 100% clean energy by 2045. It had a secondary goal to achieve a 60% RPS by 2030. This was a big bill that received many amendments, a lot of attention, and at the end of the day, it fizzled and it never passed. We'll touch more about this a little bit later in the presentation. You have probably heard of the small cell bill, or SB 649, which was quite controversial. This did pass the legislature, however, it was vetoed, and so will not become law. There was a park bond that includes $4 billion in general obligation bonds that we were focusing because it has a lot of great environmental attributes to it. And then we also had a great bill that affects Prop 218. Currently, there is some legal ambiguity as to how we as a city or other cities can treat stormwater. And so this clarifies that under state law, the process for funding stormwater projects is the same as the process for funding other water and sewer projects under Prop 218. So this was a good bill. At the end of session, near the end of session, we had an interesting bill pop up that would have imposed some fees onto the water bills of all water users. As quickly as it popped up, it died. And so it was a bill that we scrambled through CMUA, one of our partners, to address, and then it fell off. And I'll touch about that a little bit about that again later in the presentation. We also had a bill regarding lead testing in schools. That bill did pass, and it's going to mandate that we work with schools to test their potable water systems for lead. Regionalizing the Western grid, and we say Western, we're talking about the western part of the United States. If you recall, Debbie and I were here last year talking about this bill. We were here the year before talking about this bill. This is the 3rd time that the legislature has brought up at the very end of session their notion to integrate different grids with California. And this, like the water fee bill, came up very quickly and then died very quickly. So it did not pass. And then lastly, there is some federal law, or federal bill, that we are tracking with regard to streamlining licensing reform. So here's a little bit of a preview about what we think we might be able to expect in 2018. Will SB 100 come up again? It could, so we're going to continue to look about that. The water fee bill that I just mentioned, we think will come up again. It was mentioned through a chair of a legislative committee that it will be made a 2-year bill. So we are preparing through CMUA to potentially fight a bill that would tack on a fee to all water users. There was a bill a couple years ago regarding energy data transparency. Yes,
Before you're done with your presentation, I think we ought to discuss that.
absolutely.
Would this be a convenient time?
Sure, we certainly can. Would you like a little bit more information on that bill?
Yeah, what would
Okay.
those fees be? What would they be for? And why do we oppose it?
Well, it is a bill that would establish a drinking water fee that would assessed every single month on every single water user. The money would be used to help fund the disadvantaged communities who have water systems that are quite frankly failing them. So the water would be taken from Palo Alto and would go elsewhere. Yes, the money, I'm sorry, did I say the water? That would be interesting. The money, yes, thank you. So in general, if the fees mentioned in the bill this year were to continue into a bill next year, about 98% of residential customers would pay about $1 a month in additional fees. And about 2% of our residential customers would pay about $4 a month. If we consider all of our other water users as commercial, about 47% would pay about $1 more a month, 31% $4 a month, and 11% would pay up to $10 a month onto their water bill. So this is a bill that we're going to be looking at again to see what it looks like when it's introduced again, and it's something that we're definitely going to be considering. Yep, sure. Regionalization, will that come up again? Oh, sorry. Oh, sure. That was a bill, there was a bill in energy data that came up 2 years ago that just had us responsible for providing energy information to certain building owners. There was a bill this year that would do something very similar, and we think there might be a bill again next year. The reason we track this is because sometimes bills that touch on providing information also tend to get into the areas of confidentiality. And so those are some of the concerns that we just want to be sure that we're able to provide the information in a confidential manner. With regard to the tax-exempt bonds, this is a federal issue. You may have heard that Mr. Trump is considering tax reform. And whenever that happens, there's a possible issue of the tax exemption to municipal bonds and to ensure that we maintain that tax exemption. We believe that that will be maintained, but it's something that we're going to continue to monitor federally. The same thing with the hydro/energy bills, that corresponds to the federal bills that we're seeing this year and that we think we're going to see last year with regards to licensing, streamlining licensing requirements for our hydro. And the last one, the cybersecurity, just a few weeks ago, I would have said because of all of the Equifax fallout, there might be a bill regarding cybersecurity. However, that seems to have fallen off of the news cycle, and we aren't really hearing so much about that anymore. So perhaps we'll see a cybersecurity bill or not. Regardless of if there's going to be a bill, that's something that we are always following, that we're always concerned about. And I just also wanted to touch a little bit about what some of the possible impacts might be going to 2018. The pro tem, Mr. De Leon, is the author of SB 100. He's running for Congress. He is also expected to announce early in the year that he's going to step down as Senate leader. So his attention might be focused elsewhere, and he may not want to continue pushing a clean energy bill. We've also heard that he is not going to accept any amendments in that bill, which is going to be a big problem for labor, which is one of the reasons why the bill died at the end of this year. However, he might want to use us last year as his swan song through this bill. So we don't know whether or not it's going to come up again in 2018, but we're going to be prepared if it does. It's an election year, so that always impacts things. The governor's last year, what is he going to do in this last year? He was one of the big drivers of the multiple regionalization bills in the past. Will he be, in his last year, will he be focused on some other high priority issues? We just don't know. And then lastly, this is the second of a 2-year session. So in addition to having new bills introduced, we're possibly going to be having some bills from 17 continue on, so it's probably going to be a pretty busy session. So these are some of the things that are going to be impacting the bills as we track them. Any other questions about legislation? Okay. Then before we go to the second part, the suggested guideline change, we'll have Debbie introduce that.
Okay, Debbie Lloyd, currently acting AD for engineering. So I've come up in front of you, many of you, in previous years with a very long list of legislative guidelines. Heather has been working with me now for, 2 years? 2 years? And has given a fresh look to doing this. So she's come up with a suggestion for streamlining these guidelines, which should help us be, I think, more flexible in the way that we move forward and address things as we come up. What we had tried to do in previous years was pinpoint, at this stage of the game, what is likely to happen in the coming year. And as Heather just walked through, even maybe there's a culmination of what's happening this year, but certainly there's so many unknowns, uncertainties that it's really hard to pinpoint. So we would get into a situation very often where either we had a very kind of long, cluttered list of priorities, which we never got addressed during the year, or something would come, completely out of the blue and we hadn't specified it, and so now it looks like, we shouldn't take action on it. Of course, we can always come back to the UAC and get guidance that way. But the reason that we have these guidelines in the first place is that we have to be pretty nimble at times and turn around a position, and, not having time to go through, get in front of the UAC on a monthly calendar, or even to the council to get some guidelines. So with that, I will say goodbye to my guidelines and turn it over to Heather to explain her new proposal.
They were great guidelines that served us well for a number of years. So, I actually analogize sometimes working on legislative issues is like being in a car and the road can get really bumpy, and so it's great to have these guardrails. The current guidelines, however, make the road a little curvy, and so it would be nice to just have a straight kind of road, but still maintaining the guidelines. So here is just a little bit of a visual. Currently, the guidelines are 15 pages. We're suggesting 1. Currently, the guidelines are separated into various sections by utility. However, there is also an all utility section. So we would often see redundancies. Something would be mentioned in the all utility section and also in one other utility section, but perhaps not in a second utility section. So as Debbie was just suggesting, is that meaningful that the information wasn't there? Should we interpret it a certain way? It wasn't always clear. So where we had broad goals and specific guidelines, right now we're suggesting just broad guidelines, so a merger of both. And I do have a visual kind of what we might want to do. So the current guideline, it's cut off a bit. The current guideline here on the first one is supporting the infrastructure security and reliability, including one specific interconnection of one specific pipeline with a specific pipeline in another agency. Realistically, there will not be legislation about one particular water agency's pipeline and how it interconnects with one other regional pipeline. So this was always functionally moot. However, it touched on a really important topic, security and reliability of our infrastructure. So why not just make that guideline supporting efforts to maintain or improve the security and reliability of our infrastructure? That way it applies to every part of our infrastructure, not just a particular pipeline. And you'll see in a second example that perhaps it was just a little wordy and it could be interpreted various ways. So the suggestion in blue is just a little cleaner and it allows it to be applicable to various utilities. One thing to note that is important is that this still maintains those those bumpers, those guideposts. The ed and or his designee still has the final authority. We will still return to the UAAC to seek clarification or to discuss an item is necessary. And this dovetails fairly well with the city's policies. We're going before the Policy and Services Committee in a couple of weeks with their suggested 2018 guidelines, and that's about a page and a half, and it reads very much like the current guidelines that we have before you today. So with that, happy to answer any questions about any specific guidelines or if you'd like to discuss.
Back to your example there, the second one, the second example. The blue wording is sort of so generic as to, like, I mean, it just sort of is so general, I don't know what it means. I mean, at least in the other one, you're by being specific about financing, funding, and where applicable tax exemption, gives me a sense of what it's for. So unless I'm misunderstanding what the guidelines are for, I'm not quite sure. I mean, that wouldn't give me any guidance as to what you're trying to do.
We can absolutely add some clarifying language, such as tacking on at the end of the sentence for current initiatives or programs, because that's really what the intent is. Whenever we're rolling out a new program or a new initiative, if it's possible to seek government funding, that we will. For example, grant funding on a recycled water project. This guideline allows us the ability to go in to ask Congress for that appropriation through a bill when it's appropriate, or to seek grant funding. So we're certainly happy to clarify that.
That said, in this particular example, there is, in my recollection, there has never been a funding bill we have opposed, quite frankly, where it might provide funding to the city. And so we get actively involved when it is something that is of particular and timely interest.
So one topic generally is water conservation. You do have a sentence here, advocate for locally designed conservation or efficiency programs, support reasonable state conservation requirements. But it gets beyond that. It gets to the pricing of water throughout the state and the like. And I look at number 10, support government action cost effectively reduces greenhouse gas emissions. You may want something similar, support government action that supports water conservation and use, water conservation and fair pricing. I look at number 8, support the principle of beneficiary pays, which lines up somewhat with the COSO requirements, which are such an encumbrance on our ability to design programs that penalize and discourage overconsumption. And I wouldn't want to take this one too far. Now, I don't know if the legislature can override COSO or not at some point, but it would be nice, for example, if we could have tiered rates that penalized overconsumption instead of having to do everything according to actual cost. My last comment is item 12 about maintaining customer confidentiality. Yes, that's good, but there's also been problems with the bigger utilities about getting access to information that would enable energy efficiency programs and the like. So we're putting all the emphasis on customer confidentiality, and it's got to be balanced by ability to make data actionable. So those are just a few thoughts.
Thank you.
I agree with Mike on that last one, that having access, allowing the customer to make their data available to third parties because there's an application that they want to use is going to be a really important thing with AMI. And so I think we want to make sure that we're balancing the privacy with accessibility, and there are going to be ways that where we should support analysis of anonymized data. And so I just think I think that this may be a little too simplistic in its language.
We could certainly add on number 12 language regarding without barriers to gaining the adequate information. Again, this would be in reaction to state legislation. So we can certainly add that language. If there was a bill that would seem to be a little too narrowly tailored, we could do that.
There might be room for bills that actually improve access to information.
Absolutely.
So,
Yes, such as those energy data transparency bills that were mentioned. Those are bills that would serve to improve information and to allow greater access.
other thoughts? Yes.
I had the same reaction, I guess, as Commissioner Schwartz, that these guidelines are very broad in general, and I didn't see anything in here really to disagree with, but my question to you is, do they really provide you with guidance? You say that they provide you with bumpers or guardrails, but they're really broad, and do they give you enough guidance to be able to function?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think they do. Often when new legislation comes our way, it goes through a two-pronged test. One, is this something that could or would impact utilities? And then two, what does our guiding document say? So that second part is when we start looking to hear. And so this would tell us how we would want to educate policymakers, what is important to the utilities department, and some of the things that we want to advocate for vis-a-vis that particular piece of legislation.
Well, I guess if it works for you, it would work for me. But one specific question, just for my information. Number 11, promote locally designed residential and commercial electrification programs. What's an example of that program, so I know what you're...
That could be two-pronged. It could mean electric vehicle electrification, or it could mean residential electrification. And again, it's the locally designed is the emphasis. So sometimes we have state legislation that is a one-size-fits-all approach, mandating every locality do something exactly the same. And if this allows us to infuse that Palo Alto voice and to say, if you're wanting to do an electrification program, here's what's going to work for us, and here's what doesn't work for us, and here's what's even better. Allow our local officials to make that determination.
Well, does this mean you would oppose legislation that mandates, statewide mandates, residential and commercial electrification programs?
Not necessarily. The devil is in the details, so it would certainly depend on a bill, but rarely do we absolutely oppose a bill. Through our trade associations and our JPAs, we would first seek to engage with the policymaker because they've been very active in getting amendments. Sometimes we would draft letters that would say support if amended. There are different kind of crafty ways that we would go and we would try to infuse it, but we wouldn't often, I can't think of a scenario without knowing more where we would give what's called a straight up opposed position.
So how do these guidelines help you decide whether to oppose or support some kind of a statewide?
The local, with this particular one that you pointed out, the fact that it might not be in this hypothetical bill locally designed, these guidelines would help to tell me that I need to go in and educate the policymakers and talk about how it could be better, how we could make it a little more flexible to allow for local design.
Okay, and if they don't agree with you, then you still have to make a decision whether to support or oppose.
Well, we, as Palo Alto, don't often support or oppose on our own. We often go through our trade associations. And so we would work with them on a letter, and if they oppose it, we have a decision to make where we can either join within the opposition or we could stay off of that bill. Because there are some times where we often support the intent of a bill, we support part of a bill, but we may not support the bill in its entirety.
So you'd look to other guidelines to help you decide that? Because this one doesn't help you with that.
If they're absolutely, if they're relevant. These are absolutely meant to be taken comprehensively as a whole, as well as individually. Again, the flexibility is needed because we simply don't know what's going to come down the pipe. A bill like SB 100 with an aspirational 100% clean energy goal wasn't something we contemplated. So bills like that and guidelines like this allow us the flexibility to help determine our response.
And we wouldn't just be looking at one of these guidelines. We would, it's like Heather's saying, it would be comprehensive. Is this something that is going to have an impact on rates, have an impact on local control and local design of programs? Is it something that we think is cost effectively supporting greenhouse gas reductions? So there's these other, it's looking at the whole picture about where the Palo Alto position would be.
So for example, a statewide tax on water consumption, the one in the state coffers, never mind how it's used, you would oppose that?
It's difficult to answer in the abstract because rarely, unfortunately, are bills so straightforward as just to say that one sentence. So, for example, we might oppose a bill that would add money onto your water bills when that money would be taken outside and given to another water system. We might work with our partners to oppose that bill. Again, it depends on, we always look to what's in the best interest of the ratepayers, coupled with what is the priorities of the city and the utilities department.
So to that point, perhaps maybe the way to think about this is, as Heather was just describing, it's hard to do in the abstract. As a practical matter, I would say at least maybe 8 out of 10 times when a bill presents itself, it's pretty obvious whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the broad strokes that you see in the guidelines. When it gets more, I'll say, debatable in terms of whether the city's position is support or opposed, you will see it appear at the council for a discussion and specific action when it's not clearly one way or another.
But to use the example that you were talking about before, so, if $1 a month from most of the people in Palo Alto would make a difference to be able to support another disadvantaged community's water supply, I'd be completely in favor of that. Now, I don't know who the 11% are, who's going to, who are going to pay a little more or the whatever, but if it's a giant house where the $10 a month is going to be negligible to them, I'm sorry, I'd like us to support that. So I don't think that to have the hard and fast rule that if it taxes $1 onto Palo Altans that we should not support it. So I don't know. I mean, that's just the one example you gave. So, I mean, that's an example where I wouldn't want the guideline to say under no circumstances support it.
Sure, understood. And to your point, in that particular bill, we don't get a choice as to where that money goes. It would go to a statewide fund, and government officials would determine how best to disperse the money. But also to your point, we have 2 particular guidelines that speaks to how we treat bills with regard to rates, the first one and the 6th one. And so the first one talks about local government discretion, not only an oversight of matters impacting our programs, but also our rates. And that bill would not allow for local government discretion, and it would allow only for state government discretion. And the 6th one would perhaps fall under that category as we would oppose impractical rates or mandates. And perhaps that's debatable. But to your larger point, if you would like a little bit more nuanced in these guidelines with regards to a bill about rates, I'm certainly happy to take that.
So some of these goals collide, right? So for example, a water tax, as I mentioned, would promote conservation of water resources throughout the state. not that anyone's going to propose it or not, but it wouldn't necessarily be local guidelines. And so I think you need to be conscious when the goals collide, and that may be more room for time for consultation.
Absolutely, and that's why we reserve the right, as it will, to always return here and to speak with you all about that if we ever are in conflict as to a position, and we would also always seek guidance from leadership as well.
If I could return to Commissioner Schwartz's question about the $1 bill impact per month. I think probably where you see the reaction from Heather and myself and other people that have worked with the legislature for many years, if you know, there are a lot of bills out there with good intentions, and if we did support everything, then the bills could. This idea that you have this broad base of ratepayers, not taxpayers, because it's harder to collect money there, but ratepayers that you can tack a little bit here and tack a little bit there. So it's always looked at we're looking at it from the broad brush of, you know, does this keep rates and the use of that revenue under our local control? And so that's where it would come out. Now, if it's going to be like a special case in terms of, you know, we wanted to support this because it was a really important issue. As Heather said, there might be something that comes back for further discussions. But you know, generally we have, as Heather puts it, tried to educate policymakers on what the impacts are for local communities when they try and enforce programs on us that are out of our control and raise our rates and raise our costs.
Like the gas tax.
Can I speak at this point? I want to praise you for knocking this down. It sounds like it might have been tough to you. And if you could figure out a way to make it more simplistic, that's the way we ought to go. Because the key terms that we've heard here are flexibility or nimbleness. We have good people from the city manager down that we've hired, and any impediments to how quick we move is going to hurt us legislatively. So I headed a state environmental department for 6 years under some guy named Brown, and then a conservative Republican that followed him. And all 23 of our bills got through. We had none of these guidelines. And the secret is to be in touch with what's happening and the goals we have. So let's just pick the bill we've been talking about. Our state assemblyman, Ira Ruska, carried the first bill to do this, saying 423,000 people in the San Joaquin Valley are drinking unsafe water in violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and yet the state does nothing. If we went to him and wanted to oppose the bill, we lose credibility on virtually everything else that we were working with, because this was so important to him. We've got to be in touch to be able to fit for the situation, and there's all sorts of weird things that happen, as you pointed out. We need to make this as simple as possible, and I don't want to see you guys ever in a meeting because we're interfering with your ability to get your job done. It needs to be quick and fast. You know, I had a full-time guy handling garbage and recycling in my particular area, and it's just too squirrely and strange up there. So as little guidance as we give you, the better you're going to do your job.
Thank you.
Appreciate the voice of experience there.
I actually had a question on number 13 because it seems to have a different focus. The others all are about going to the legislature, and that is going to constituents here, and I'm wondering what the purpose of that one is.
Sure. Thank you for that question. This was newly added last year as a direct result of that earlier data energy bill that I mentioned. We realized after analyzing the legislation that it was going to affect our key accounts, And we weren't sure if we had the authority through this body to educate the key accounts about state legislation that might affect them. Were we the proper conduit of that information? Was it the role of the city and the utilities department to educate our key accounts about public policy? We weren't sure. And so last year, this was discussed at this body, and it was decided that we should be doing that as a service to our customers, and that's why you see before you this particular item.
Just one thought. I certainly appreciate simplicity. Going from 15 pages to 1 page is, well, as Commissioner Trumbull points out, I think on its face a good thing. I guess I have this. I want to make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, in the sense that you said what you used to do was sort of collect all the issues that you felt were coming up in the year ahead, and setting aside putting them in a document that has to be, that's not a living, you know, that this isn't going to carry through for a whole year. I still think there's a lot of value in discussing with UAC and with council, here's what we see coming legislatively, and invoking some of the debate like we're having tonight around this particular water fee issue. I just don't want to lose the you know, if it's annual ritual of discussing specific, you know, things that you see on the horizon that might be coming up in the state legislature or federally that might affect the utility, and just sort of having that discussion about what people think about it.
Yes, absolutely. There is no intention to remove this piece that we've had here today in speaking about legislation that we feel is coming up in 2018. So regardless of what the guidelines do or do not look like, we will continue to return every year and have the discussion that we have today with you. Additionally, in our quarterly and biannual reports, there is a legislative piece to it, and so that is another mechanism by which staff informs the UAC about current legislation.
That's great. I do, you know, and my memory of a year ago isn't as strong as I wish it was, but I guess the preview 2018, like, I don't feel like we really went into any detail on any of these, so I didn't come away from this list with a sense that I understand any of them.
Okay.
So then that would just be a request for it to be maybe a little bit more fleshed out, so that we understood what the, like, I didn't even come away with an understanding of whether, you know, that you were leaning to oppose or modify or amend or support. They were just sort of a very brief,
right,
this is what the issue is, kind of thing.
And that's partly because we don't know. We can, when we say we think this bill will return, I literally mean I think it will return, because oftentimes members will say, specifically in a 2-year session, that the bill will be brought back, and then it isn't, or it's completely different than what it looked like. And so unfortunately, there's not a lot of specificity as to what we can tell you about this is going to happen, partly because it's totally outside of our control. But I can tell you that we come here today after having discussions and meetings with our counterparts in CMUA and in NCPA, and in speaking with both our federal and state lobbyists. And so they can tell us these are the issues, just the issue areas that we think are ripe for action in 2018. But literally the new bills haven't been drafted yet, and we aren't for sure if former bills are going to be carried over. But I take your point. If there is a way that we can come to you next year with a little more specificity as to what we think is going to happen, we're certainly willing to do that.
I guess, to try to verbalize again, my concern with these is they put a lot of weight on maintaining local control over just about everything, which may collide with what's good state policy and different actions. For example, should we have local gas taxes and the city spending the gas tax and the gas sold in Palo Alto, or do we have a statewide gas tax to go into our highway system? And what might be great for Palo Alto to have local control in some cases, may not be the right policy throughout the state. I don't know. So I want to, I'd comfort to know that there's a balance on that, that it's not just, city rights trumps all.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we are intended by local government flexibility is the same thing as what is carried out by City Council as a citywide goal of local flexibility. It's not to say that we want to have control to design each specific program that the state legislature can contemplate. It's to say that we should be allowed the flexibility to take that mandate and apply it in a way that works best for our businesses and our residents. So if there's going to be a mandate, for example, for water storage, great, but please, legislature, we would say to them, don't prescribe it in such minute detail, don't regulate it such that it's completely unworkable for Palo Alto. Rather, give us some parameters, give us the mandate, and then allow us the flexibility to determine how best to apply the mandate to our city.
Well, and let me also add, once again, just voice of experience. This played out last session, affordable housing, small cells. Again, both issues in which there may be an agenda larger than any individual city. In the case of small cells, City Council, very clear, wanted to fight and oppose the bills, which we took all the way through. In the case of affordable housing, there were issues of local control versus statewide control. Ultimately, the City Council took a position, but the bill as a package went forward nonetheless, SB 35 in particular. So I think the way these play out ultimately reflects that balance, while ultimately in the local level, the City Council has the prerogative to give us a direction on the specific bills in front of us. They are the broad brush directions, and again, to be applied based upon the specific circumstances of the bills. But yes, they do give us the basic authority that allow us to move quickly when necessary.
Thank you for the reminder. See, you've asked that the commission recommend council adopt a resolution. No, pardon me, that's the wrong one. This is, we've changed the order here. That the City Council approve these guidelines. Is there more discussion from anybody?
Move approval.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. So that leaves us with water leak. Heather and Debbie, thank you. All right.
Shall I introduce Anthony Nenario from our customer support division, is representing us. Tom Alzan, who had previously reported on this issue at a prior meeting, and be prepared to respond to any questions. Effectively, this follows up on the prior discussion related to water leaks, and staff now has a proposed change in policy.
Wanted to know if you have any questions regarding the updated policy, the water billing adjustment policy.
Commissioners?
One question, just to clarify, I mean, as I read this, there is a is a cap, an upper limit on how much could be forgiven for a water leak of $500. So if the water leak cost was $1,000 or greater than that, it would still be $500.
That's correct, and that was it was written like that so that it would be fair and equitable for both the utility and the customer.
Okay. And then somewhere, I saw something about $50,000. Yeah, at the bottom of page 3, the annual water leak adjustment cost total $50,000. I guess this was under the prior policy back in
Yeah.
pre-2006.
That's correct.
At that time, was there a limit on the amount that could be forgiven?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Because that would imply 1,000 leaks, and that,
My,
and our
My
understanding
understand-
was there many fewer than 1,000 of these
my understanding
adjustments.
was that the $50,000 included,
I'm sorry, 100 leaks, I guess that's.
the $50,000 included unknown leaks or unknown sources of high water consumption. I don't have an exact number of how many adjustments that 50,000 necessarily included.
And I believe, as I've heard a description of the prior policy, the credit was effectively minus the wholesale cost of water, is that correct?
That's correct. It was a wholesale cost of water plus a 10%.
So it was an entirely different basis that was used for the credit without a limitation, as you point out.
Okay, thank you.
In the last few years, how many cases would the limit have affected things? In the last few years, how many cases have come up above the $500 limit?
Just this past summer, after the drought, I personally have seen at least a dozen or so leaks. We've had, unfortunately, after the drought, after our customers started using water, there were a lot of instances with irrigation system breaking. And so I know having to review and investigate some of these high water bill, there were more than a dozen. This.
That were above $500?
Yes.
Okay. One question that had come up from citizens is if there's going to be these leak, apply the lower tier rate rather than the higher tier rate to those. That's not exactly in your, you haven't done that here. You've just said the $500, we'll apply it first to the higher tier. And
actually, there's a cap of $500, but the way that the adjustment would work would be to apply the higher tier rate for that overage, for whatever the excess water would be.
I'm sorry, I'm not being an attorney like some of my colleagues. I found this could have used some simplicity for me. I found it a little overwhelming to read, to sort of understand the bottom line, but there are some people for whom a $500 bill would be a hardship versus other people that it would be, okay, you know, it was supposed to be a $10,000 bill and now it's only $500 and okay. And so do we have some way to, if it's something, like, again, if you have AMI and you have leak detection, hopefully you won't ever get to that point because you'll get an alert that says something's out of whack. But for somebody for whom this would be a hardship, is there some remedy that we can have, that we can look at it on a case-by-case basis?
So Commissioner Schwartz, I think you might be a little misleading in this, and maybe we're not very clear with this, but what we're saying is that if there was a bill that came out and there was a high bill and it was due to this water leak, and we'll just say it was $1,500 from the bill, the first $500 at the highest tier, so it would push the tier cost into the second tier. We will take the $500 off that top tier. The customer still will owe us $1,000 on their bill. It's not a $500 flat bill charge. If it's even $10,000 or if it's going to be $1,000. So what we're saying is that it's only going to be a $500 reduction in their cost of the highest tier, taken off the bill. So it'd be, so if you took your example of $10,000, the customer is still going to owe us $9,500.
I don't think it's going to solve the problem then.
Depends on what problem we're trying to solve. The issue that we're presented with was to provide some forgiveness for a customer that had a leak and was looking for relief, some relief of the cost. So this provides up to a $500 credit to provide that relief. It does not completely absolve the additional cost. And again, you could have a variety of different methodologies used to provide the defrayed, to provide the credit, but this is an administratively simple approach that we're
All right,
suggesting.
so the way we looked at it was, it's an insurance program. Everybody's in it. You know, if insurance applies, the broader rate base absorbs that cost, the utility, and we're okay with it from that point of view. I think providing $500 insurance doesn't give that much coverage in some of these, and is maybe unnecessarily low. I throw out, for example, adjustment could be the higher of $1,000 or half of the excess bill, something like that. So yeah, there's a sharing there on these outer rate things, but still a meaningful adjustment for things. I'd be in favor of being more generous. I had the same reaction you did when you read it, and that you just did when you understood it. So other thoughts on that?
I think one of the goals also was to make it administratively easy, is that right? And so maybe some balance between the ease of administration, but a little more generous forgiveness without going back to the old system, which I understand was difficult to manage from your perspective. So I appreciate the flat number, but maybe there's either another number or a formula that's still manageable that can get to your goal as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
If somebody gets a $1,500 water bill, which is because there was a leak in their landscaping system and so forth, what's the marginal cost to the city of the extra water? What's out of the $1,500? What's the marginal cost of that?
I think it's $4.10, I believe, per.
$4.10?
$4.10, right? Yeah.
So out of the 1,500, 410 is the cost of the city?
$4.10 per 100 cubic feet.
Per CCO, sorry.
Okay. And what are we charging them per 100 cubic feet?
It's in the ballpark of, I guess on average, we're at around $7.
Okay.
$7.50.
I mean, this is a policy deal, and it's completely different from what you guys did. But since there doesn't appear to be unanimity on this here, just throw it out. You could say we're going to charge, we're going to charge people, the marginal cost down to the marginal cost, right? Because if you charge people less than the marginal cost, okay, then other people got to pay for it, right? But if you charge them the marginal cost, then theoretically other people don't have to pay for it, right?
Right. Our rates reflect the incremental cost for each increment of water. So I think what you're suggesting would actually take it back to the commodity cost versus
commodity cost versus the infrastructure cost.
Additional, yes, that would be the old policy. So in effect, if in rough proportions, the commodity represents about, let's say, 60% of the total cost of delivering the water. So if it were roughly either a 50-50 or 60-40 share, that would effectively be the credit. What gets a little challenging there is, in order to calculate that credit, we'd need to make an estimate of what would the cost or the volume of water be that they'd use absent the leak.
Hence the administrative simplicity. Okay.
I'd like to propose, just being more generous, that the leak adjustment be $1,000 per application, or if higher, 1/2 of the overage of the excess charges. So if it were a $2,000 leak or $3,000 leak, we'd pay $1,500. That'd be the insurance policy. I don't mind going more generous than that, but I'll throw that out as for discussion. Lauren?
I guess what I'm hearing is it gets tricky to administer As a concept, I like the idea of sharing the burden with the leaker and also relieving them of some of the burden. I would turn to you to see if that's the way to manage it. I mean, I think you're getting a clear message from us, maybe to be a little more generous, but to not necessarily shift the burden outside of the individual, but in a way that you can manage.
Yeah, I think the one other thing to remember is that it's not always individuals. It might be a large facility with a major water leak and that runs into the tens of thousands of dollars. And that maybe is not the situation that you're thinking about for this water leak policy. So we might need to take that into consideration as well.
Have to be treated exactly the same?
I believe the attorney would say yes.
With that, I don't know if that's correct or not, but maybe then it's, if the overage is some range, there's, the forgiveness is this, and if it's some other range, you know, maybe have a tiered forgiveness system. Not too many tiers, but I don't know.
Be simple, write off half the cost up to a maximum of $5,000.
Maximum credit of 5,000?
Yes, well,
I
or,
had no idea the UAC was so generous.
yeah. Well, I think insurance, something that would cover all the residential things would be, there'd be, say, up to $5,000 charge. So with $5,000 of overrides, it'd be a maximum credit, $2,500.
2,500,
Yeah.
okay.
Does that cover most of the residential ones or all of them? Give them
You know,
some
at the
relief?
high end, it's my experience with this has been purely anecdotal. So it's been really difficult to gain any sense of what's typical versus what's, say an average. Perhaps that is something we could take a closer look at to see if we can have any better sense of the order of magnitude.
I would be surprised if residential customers are getting more than $1,000 water bills. That would be, I mean, I've had a water leak.
No, with a leak, well, there's
I've
one
had
example.
a water leak, and with the water leak, the bill was, $500.
There's a letter in here for someone who had a $1,500 bill. So that's what I was responding to.
But that, it would be useful, I think, to understand what the kind of
The range might be.
of water
Yes,
leaks.
yes, understood.
Well, anyway, if you want to come back to us with something that's more generous with the
let's do
insurance
that.
concept in mind, that'd be fine.
Understood.
Can I just add one? I do share the general sentiment of hoping for something a little more generous. I'm not sure I would go all the way to a $2,500 level of generosity. But I was curious about the calculation of leak volumes being made using averages and whether those were going to be seasonally targeted averages, because it strikes me that could be adding an unintentional level of generosity, that if the average is computed using the winter months when the outdoor irrigation is off, that would set an inappropriately low level that you'd be discounting off of.
We would normally use the average for the last 3 years of the same month. So we would be looking at month to month, the same month for the last 3 years.
Year over year.
Right.
Great, glad to hear that.
Okay, we will take another look at it with eye to a higher maximum, so to speak.
All right.
But I think we agree having it administratively simple is very important. We don't want to put a burden on you to kind of arbitrate the amount.
Or something to be simple to explain to
Yes,
consumers.
thank you.
Okay. All right, well then we'll move on from there. We do have this informational memorandum here on demographics of our customers, and I recommend that to people who haven't read it yet. Very interesting. And given the hour, I don't want to make it a discussion item tonight, but we might want to refer to it in the future on that. Thank you for for putting this together for us. The last item would be selection of potential topics for discussion at future meetings.
Yes, you have quite a busy upcoming, let's see, this is showing November, but it's actually both November, December. We've got the strategic plan next month, which will, I imagine, take quite a bit of time. We also, looks like it didn't make it on here, we did want to follow up on the cross-bore next steps. So we have that coming back to you in December.
Okay, and yeah, if you think the agenda is too crowded in December and you want to move any of those to January, that your judgment on that.
We will do that. I believe what we've got on here, at least at this point, staff felt was time sensitive enough to try and pack
Okay.
it in.
Okay.
What's your sense when the joint study session might actually happen?
We were really hoping to have some tentative dates for you this evening, but unfortunately, we're not able to get that via the city clerk, so we're still working on that.
Okay. Yes, please.
If I could go back to the demographic data, it would be great in response to Councilman Philsif's comment to know how many, if you have the data, who lives and works here versus who is commuting out of Palo Alto?
Maybe if we have time, we could have a conversation, if not in December, in January, about knowing our customers and sort of maybe do have a discussion about that. That could be a useful thing to do when we have time. So if not December, then January, which
Okay.
looks lighter.
That would be good. Okay.
Very good.
Any other comments from people? Are we ready to adjourn? All right, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.